So as I've described this element, this layer of the process, what I really want to refer to this as, this is really representing the pre-startup. The pre-startup kind of activities. How do you get from a concept in your head, once you've decided to act on an idea or inspiration that you might have had, how do you get from there to the point where day one you're ready to offer something? Now, some of you might think that once you get to commercial ready venture, you've accomplished all of the hard part. It's done. But in reality, your journey to entrepreneurship is only beginning at this stage. And so what tends to happen after your day one, you've got your product, your organization, and you're trying to work this process, this is what tends to happen. You know, and over there, notice I'm drawing a flat line here. Because you're all ready to receive customers and to start doing business, but all of a sudden, I mean, you're seeing that no customers are coming. And then at some point, if you're lucky, did I say if you're lucky? If you're lucky, you're going to start getting some traction when you start promoting your business in the market and people are seeing that you're out there and you're offering some kind of a product or service that truly makes sense in the marketplace. If you're lucky, you're going to get some early adopters to start buying your product or service. But even some of these early adopters, I mean, you might get excited about that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've been able to create an ongoing business with these repeatable transactions that I'm talking about. And here's where I like to refer to. Notice I left a little gap here, and what do I refer to in this gap of this transition from these early adopters to more of a sweet spot in the market where you're really gaining momentum? Some of these ideas come from, I like to refer to this as, or Jeffrey Moore likes to refer to this as the chasm. And his famous book, Crossing the Chasm. How do you get from a few early adopters that are buying into your product or service idea and trying to get over this chasm so that you can get to the sweet spot of the market where you start hitting more of a mass market, and now your challenge it's a very different kind of a challenge here. So where here you're trying to get concerned with going from concept to getting something up and running, here between crossing this chasm to get over to this side, it's a lot more than just having excess demand. What you're really concerned with here is how do you build the systems that, from an organization perspective, are going to enable you to begin to run an organization that really has the capability of handling lots and lots of customers. If you had a hunch about the market that ultimately, if you can produce a product or service that people want to buy and you can get out to here, your challenge as an entrepreneur is, can you build the organization? Can you build the systems that can ultimately help you develop a sustained company? Now, as we think about this, I need to bring us back to this area where, and I'll use this color. I want you to think about this. Now, what did I just draw? These really represent hurdles along the way. These represent the kind of challenges that you're going to face as you're trying to come up and develop your concept to try to get from concept to commercial ready venture, why do these hurdles come up? I want to introduce a concept that I learned from Ian McMillan and Rita Gunther McGrath in their book Entrepreneurial Mindset. They talk about the assumptions to knowledge ratio. The assumptions to knowledge ratio. And what they really imply by this particular ratio is that very early on, when you're in concept stage and you have an idea for a product, or you have an idea for who might be interested and willing to buy your product, and you have an idea of how you're going to reach that customer, you're building a business model that's primarily based on assumptions, and you have very little knowledge. And so when you've got an idea that's primarily built on assumptions with very little knowledge, what does that imply? It implies that the likelihood of you being absolutely correct in your product designs, in your customer identification, in your plan for designing the business, it really implies that many of your assumptions may not be correct. And so, as you try to build in different features in early prototypes of your product or service, in all likelihood, those early prototypes aren't necessarily going to be what the customer is looking for. And it could be that as you're designing your product or service, you may be designing for a customer segment that isn't really interested in your product, and you may need to think about looking at other potential segments of the market. And it also may mean that as you're trying to get from here to here, you might run into some regulatory hurdles or roadblocks or technical hurdles or market-based hurdles or competitive roadblocks into the market. So many times I see early stage entrepreneurs, they think they've got such a unique idea that they really fundamentally believe that there's no competition out there until they actually go into the market and run into a lot of these hurdles. So I like to refer to these as these different roadblocks and hurdles and opportunities. So as you try to navigate through this very complex process to try to get to commercial ready venture, every one of these represents a reason to give up. Every one of these represents a signal from the market that maybe your initial ideas aren't going to work the way you initially envisioned them to do so. And when that happens, you've got a couple of choices to make. Eric Ries, in his book called The Lean Startup, would refer to those as pivot or persevere, kind of decisions that you have to make. And so as you try to navigate through some of these hurdles and the roadblocks and the challenges, you have to decide whether your initial assumptions are correct when you get feedback from the market. In those cases, you're going to persevere down this path. But when the roadblocks and the market signals are so great that you need to rethink it, that's when pivot comes into play, all right, where you change your thinking about the product idea or the market or the customer segment or even ways to reach that customer segment. But I'm going to add another one here is pivot, persevere, or ultimately you might even consider walk away. So those are your, every time you run into these kind of roadblocks as you're trying to establish momentum, and you're going to have these momentum shifts, if you will, you're either going to decide to persevere because the market is encouraging you to continue, pivot because the market is causing you to change your assumptions, but not enough to walk away. Or the most drastic version of it is when you really get feedback from the market that your idea may not have the kind of initial attraction that you thought it would. And so as you try to navigate through this aspect of the whole process, you're constantly making these kind of evaluations. Should I persevere? Should I pivot? Or should I ultimately think about walking away from the business? So my question to you is, when we look at such a messy path of getting from concept to commercial-ready venture, how do we know? I mean, what keeps an entrepreneur going in the face of all of this adversity, in the face of all of these challenges to the initial assumptions? My take on that is that what keeps an entrepreneur going through this process is something way out here. And I like to refer to this as vision. Vision. Okay? Vision in the sense of when you've come up with an idea and you've ultimately decided to act on that idea, and you've got this concept and you're trying to get to commercial-ready venture, and you're running into all of these roadblocks, these hurdles, these challenges of trying to get through this part of the process, what tends to keep an entrepreneur going is a fundamental belief in this, is a fundamental belief in their vision of what an up-and-running business could ultimately look like, that's going to enable you to bring these products and services to the market consistently to serve customer needs that you've identified. So this is a very quick overview of the entrepreneurial process, and some things to think about when you come up with that concept. You're already thinking out here of what the vision of a business might be, and then you're coming back here and then starting to think about what is it going to take to get from concept to commercial-ready venture.